Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Well, it's time now for the week that was. Let's take a look at the top stories that made headlines around the globe this week. Nigeria's House of Representatives this week rejected an accusation of religious persecution and genocide against Christians in Nigeria, being promoted by the U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, describing it as a misleading narrative. This comes as the national lawmakers called for a coordinated diplomatic and domestic response to a proposed legislation in the United States Senate, which will seek to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern over alleged violation of religious freedom. Now, Senator Ted Cruz, who is the junior United States Senator from Texas, recently introduced a bill seeking to protect Christians in Nigeria from what he described as religious persecution and genocide. Now, I find it, amazing that we're always so quick to say this is not happening and you're absolutely wrong. This takes me back to the incident in Canada where we saw that politician, his name just skips my mind, who was trying to get asylum. And, it was basically said that he had been involved. That's what the immigration court had told him, that he had been involved in organizations that they described as terrorists because of the fact that Nigeria had become a hotbed for insurgency at the time when these political parties he was involved in were, in power. Now, we see a similar situation here. And for me, I do not appreciate the blanket statement of it all, but I always look at comments like this as a wake-up call. Are we in a dire state of insecurity in Nigeria? Yes, we are. Are Christians and Muslims alike being killed? Yes, they are. Do people die in several parts of the country? And we send in our condolences, and we still anticipate a situation where a Nigerian in a state like Zaria can be in their community and know that they are 100% safe. We are not there yet. So when you see a comment like this, I just think that as opposed to jumping and saying, no, you're absolutely wrong, we need to actually look at this as a wake-up call and understand that I know they always say, even if it's within the house, it's okay. Let's say what we want to about Nigeria within Nigeria, but other people are not allowed to criticize us. The world is watching us. And posterity is going to look upon us on how we handle the state of insecurity in this country. There are too many people dying every single month, and it is abnormal. And that is exactly what I look at this report as to whether the thematics of what he's saying is true in terms of numbers, in terms of when the incident happened. Looking at it on a general scale, we do have an insecurity problem. And I'm just going to look at this as what it is, a wake-up call for us as a country to do better.
Indeed, it is a wake-up call. By the way, we have Adeswa, our colleague in Abuja, yes, who will wade in shortly. But of course, given what Kachia started with, indeed, it is a wake-up call. It's a message that Nigeria cannot ignore. But of course, we also know that Nigeria is not ignoring that call. I think the clarifications that we're getting from practically all the arms of government, from the Honorable Minister of Information to House of Reps, to practically everybody's presidential spokespersons, all they are saying is that do not exaggerate what is going on in Nigeria, one. And then two, possibly more importantly, is not to misrepresent what is happening by calling it a genocide. But of course, we know that when you see a consistent pattern of terror attacks, particularly in areas that are known to be Christian areas, states like Plateau, states like Benue, states like Ondo, where a church was attacked, a few years ago, you can't run away from the sort of narrative that we're getting from Ted Cruz. And of course, I believe that it started with Bemaya, who said that, where is everybody? Where are the Christians of the world? Why are they looking away? But the government of Nigeria is saying that, yes, people are dying. It is sad. We're doing our best to curtail it. We're trying to fight terrorism. But it is not a religious war. And that there is no genocide going on against Nigerian Christians. If we are to talk of Nigerian Christians the way that Americans are saying, it will look as if the entire southern part of Nigeria, which is heavily populated with Christians, and then a good chunk of the North Central are being attacked on account of the religion of the people. But that is not what is going on in Nigeria. It is bad, it is sad, it is condemnable what is going on, but then don't let us say wrongly that it's a targeted attack on Christians and it is at a genocidal level. That is not what is happening, but whatever is happening, it is condemnable, and that's what we must, hammer on. We had a heated debate about this on Sunday, on the Sunday show with Mr. Kayode Komolafe, who also, came up with a sensible argument of, in spite of what is happening, don't let us also take lectures from those who might have an agenda against our country. And I think that is an important point to take on board, while also reminding the authorities, particularly the security apparatus of Nigeria, that, they are not getting a pass mark yet. And because they seem to be failing in what they are doing, that is why we have a Ted Cruz, that is why we have a Bill Maher saying that Christians are dying in their numbers. Yes, Christians are dying, but Muslims are also dying, and there's no genocide against Nigerians in that part of the world, in the northern part of Nigeria, as at this point. This is why you may want to wade in, given the fact that you are very close to what the authorities are saying in Abuja about it.
Definitely. I agree with you in that we have to be very careful, and of course I agree with our own KK there in that we should not take lectures from certain people. Of course, they've refused to call what is going on in Gaza a genocide, particularly when we look at Ted Cruz and the American right, when we look at the Christian nationalist movement going on in the right. And this was also a pushback to Nigeria's stance on that. And so we must be very careful when people who do not really care for our well-being start to use us as some sort of checkmate in an argument against what's going on in Israel and Gaza, which they refuse to call a genocide, but yet they're describing what is going on in Nigeria as a genocide. And of course, the federal government has come out against that. Now both the Senate and the House of Representatives have come out against that. And the motion that was moved by the Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, Honorable Benjamin Kalu, was co-sponsored by all the members. It was a unanimous decision that we must come out against this rhetoric that Christians are being killed in Nigeria on account of their religion. You mentioned the attacks in Christian areas, but we've also seen the mosque attacks, the very horrible mosque attacks that we have seen in Nigeria in multiple states. A lot of the victims of insecurity have also been Muslim, and it's the idea here is not to not hold our government accountable for the high level of insecurity we're facing, the banditry, the terrorism, the kidnapping, the crime. That's not the idea here. But the idea is not to misconstrue what is happening in Nigeria to fit somebody else's narrative for the betterment of their own selves or for their own agendas. We must be very careful, and particularly when we're talking about sovereignty, the sovereignty of African nations, the intent of speaking and deciding our own stories for ourselves and not have it being told for us on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Now, Honorable Osawaru, who spoke, also said that it is also important to stress the fact that we do not have an ambassador. And I think these things that we're going to see keep coming up. Is Nigeria missing from the international stage when we have no UN permanent representative, when we have no ambassador to the United States? These are important considerations, I think, for President Tinubu.
Absolutely, very well said, Adesua. All right, we move on. President Bola Tinubu on Thursday this week approved the appointment of a new chairman for the Independent National Electoral Commission, pending the confirmation of the Senate. Tinubu also extended presidential pardons to 175 Nigerians, living and dead, including early nationalist Herbert Macaulay, late Major General Maman Vatsa, who was executed for plotting a coup, 4 leaders of the Ogoni ethnic extraction who lost their lives to a mob action in 1994, as well as 4 former convicts, including a one-time member of the House of Representatives, Farouk Lawan, Anastasia Daniel Nwaubia, Husseini Umar, and Aila Saudu Halanamu.
Chaired by President Bola Tinubu and made up of former heads of state, governors and leaders of the National Assembly are meeting for the second time under the Tinubu administration. At the top of the agenda, the leadership of the nation's electoral body ahead of the 2027 general elections.
So in keeping with that statutory provisions, Mr. President today recommended to Council of State Professor Joash O. Amopitan. George is a professor of law. As a matter of fact, also a professor of evidence. He's a highly respected scholar with impeccable credentials. And on the presentation of his name, Council unanimously approved and consented to the recommendation for his appointment. Speaker after speaker spoke glowingly of this professor as a very serious-minded scholar, a man of high integrity, and a tested and trusted hand who has never participated in any partisan politics.
Professor Amopitan, 58, is the Senior Advocate of Nigeria and Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of Jos. He becomes the first person from Kogi State in Nigeria's North Central region to be nominated for the position. He replaces Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, who bowed out this week after a decade-long service as INEC chairman. Notably absent from the hybrid meeting were the former heads of state, Yakubu Gowon, Olusegun Obasanjo, and Goodluck Jonathan. The Council of State also acknowledged the security challenges facing the country.
The National Council of States also acknowledged the security challenges in the country and did everything to support, because the second meeting, which was the Police Council, is meant to boost the capability of Nigerian police to fight crime. I think they aligns properly with the concerns of every Nigerian on the increasing insecurity, while also acknowledging the role and the successes recorded of late by our security agencies. I think it is a general concern. Security is for all of us.
The highest advisory council also approved the president's recommendation for the prerogative of mercy to be handed to 175 citizens across Nigeria, including a posthumous pardon for military General Maman Vasta and the Ogoni 9 environmental activists executed under military rule in 1995.
After the deliberation, the council approved unanimously for the different categories of the prerogative of mercy. The total is about 175. Of the total, email recommended for presidential clemency were about 82. Those recommended for reduced sentence for their terms of imprisonment are 65. Those recommended for reduced sentences from death to life imprisonment are about 7 in number. The chairman of the National Population Commission that was appointed based on the approval of the Council of States unanimously is Dr. Aminu Yusuf from Niger State, as well as the Federal Commissioner representing Yobe State in person of Alhaji Tonga Betara Bularafa, who is also appointed today and unanimously approved by the Council of State.
Council members also endorsed 959 national honors and special awards for 2024 and 2025, recognizing contributions in public service, sports, journalism, and humanitarian work. In a separate session, the Police Council approved an increase in the Nigeria Police Trust Fund allocation from 0.5 to 1% of the Federation account.
We also phrase that the Council should approve the refill and the reenactment of the Nigerian Police Trust Fund Establishment Act 2025 in order to remove the sunset clause and transition it into an agency.
It also endorsed the new executive bill to make the fund a permanent agency and observe the minute silence for the late former Inspector General of Police, Solomon Arase.
Your Excellency, sir.
Professor Amopitan's nomination now heads to the Nigerian Senate for confirmation, a decision that comes as Nigeria prepares for another decisive election cycle in 2027. As debates grow over how the head of the electoral body should be chosen and how credible posts can be guaranteed, no doubt the new INEC chair has his work cut out for him in stirring reforms and rebuilding confidence in Nigeria's democratic process. From the presidential villa, Adesua Omoruan, Arise News.
All right, that's two important developments from Abuja in the course of the week. A new INEC chairman has emerged, of course, pending the confirmation by the National Assembly. It's a 58-year-old senior advocate of Nigeria University lecturer, Professor Joash Amukpiton, SAN, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor in the University of Jos. He's been nominated, and the Council of State unanimously endorsed his nomination to succeed Professor Mahmood, who has left a month to the time it was meant to clock 10 years as the INEC chairman. Of course, we will have a guest in the studio who will, Matthias Emeribe, of course, who will speak to us about, what is going on, expectations about Professor Amukpiton, what should be the low-hanging fruit. But hey, after 10 years of Professor Mahmood, a new helmsman is needed, and the president has, chosen the gentleman from Kogi State. First time that North Central will produce INEC chairman. It was down to between North Central or Southwest. The president picked, nominated the gentleman from North Central. We await the confirmation of the National Assembly, which of course a lot of people believe that it will pass, and then we can now begin to see what Professor Amukpiton has in stock for INEC. There are at least 3 off-season elections before the general elections of 2027. The Anambra State elections is next month. Next year, there will be Osun and Ekiti governorship elections, and we will see what he has in store for us. And very quickly from me, Kachi Adesua, is also the importance of the 175 people recommended to the president for presidential clemency, including the former nationalist Herbert Macaulay, Mamman Vatsa, Diogoni Nai, Farouk Lawan, a number of people. This is what presidents do once something like that is recommended, and it does go through the mill before that recommendation comes. It's within the powers of the president, backed by the Council of State, to extend presidential clemency to those that he feels they deserve it. But then there are small talks here and there, particularly concerning the late nationalist Herbert Macaulay, who has now been given a presidential pardon. And people are wondering that, is that even necessary, given that this man has been celebrated, the former who founded NCNC, in those days, leading to the gaining independence in 1960. He's on 1 naira note, he's on a coin. He has about 2 states named after him. In Lagos State, is well respected, and people say this clemency, this pardon that you are giving him, is it to tidy the books or is it really to honor him? But then what can we say? The president thinks that will be in order, so that if anybody is referring to Herbert Macaulay, henceforth you won't say that the colonialist found him wanting in certain areas of his political life. But hey, the president should be commended at least for what he has done, even though people feel that, what's the point, particularly for Herbert Macaulay. Kachi?
I couldn't agree more. Also considering that in total, they reviewed about 294 cases, and if we're breaking down to 175, there was clemency for 82 inmates, pardon for 2, a reduction of prison terms for about 65, commutation of 7 death sentences to life imprisonment. That's basically 7 people who were on the death row will no longer be killed. Now they will just be spending life in prison, and that's very, I can imagine the relief for those people. Of course, posthumous pardons as well for 15 ex-convicts, Herbert Macaulay being one of them, Vatsa being another. And that also includes the Ogoni 9, and we saw the Ogoni 4 with the national honors. All in all, this is I think, irrespective of what several activists have to say on the individuality basis, on how who the pardons were given to. Some activists would still say that what they're looking for is, what's the word? When you say that they didn't, the word escaped my mind, they didn't do it at all with regard to the Ogoni 9. You know, some would say that when you say you're pardoning someone, you're just saying that
they were never guilty.
Exactly, that's the word I'm looking for, thank you. Some would say that when you grant someone a pardon, it basically means that they've done something that they were guilty of, and then you are forgiving them for doing that. But there's still arguments amongst activists to say that this did not even happen, that these 9 were not guilty of what they were accused of. But of course, we know that I would say that this pardon in all is basically President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's response to this. And we've seen that response come with support from the likes of the governor of Rivers State, Fubara, who has commended the president on his decision. This all started from Senator George Akume, the Secretary General of the Federation, and he created something that was inaugurated in January 2025 called the Presidential Advisory Committee on the Prerogative of Mercy, PACPM. And I believe that this would also see many more reviews of cases of people who have very terminal cases in prison, you know, who are maybe sick or are over 60. And I just generally think that it is interesting to see how this plays out in the coming years. I think this is something that's even going to outlive this presidency to the next and future presidencies to come.
All right, Adesua.
Yes, you know, just very quickly, because you guys have basically said it all here. On Amukbitan, I think, you know, I think any questions that the Nigerian public might have about his resume or his CV or his experience or his non-partisanship, I think people should pose those questions to the members of the House of Representatives or the senators who represent them. Because if he comes and he just bows that we've seen for the ministers, then perhaps some questions that people will have not been answered. Because there has been quite a lot of misinformation or disinformation online about this man. He's somebody who's obviously has not been very well known to a vast majority of the Nigerian public, and he's somebody that, you know, people find that that's a very important position, the chairman of INEC, when we're talking about democracy and the sanctity of our democracy. And we're living in an environment where there's such low trust that you have, you know, even people misrepresenting, saying that he was the lead counsel for the APC or for Tinubu in the presidential tribunals, which is not the case. That was Lateef Fagbemi, who's now our AGF, and of course Olanipekun SAN, a very legendary lawyer. But even if this was the case, I think there are questions that people have, and the people who are supposed to pose the questions that the Nigerian public has are our representatives in the Senate and the House of Reps. And so I hope they do their job when it comes to his screening. But on the on everything else, I think you guys have said all that needs to be said.
Thank you so much, Adesua. Thank you for that. Well, this time last week, I definitely could not have this conversation without bawling my eyes out. So I'm very grateful that we've come to this point with regards to the fact that 12 suspects have been arrested in connection with the violent robbery in Abuja, which claimed the lives of my very, very dear friend and colleague, a Rise TV anchor, Somi Maduagu, and a security guard. Now, according to the FCT Police Command, the suspects were tracked down through digital intelligence. 4 were initially arrested after stolen phones from the scene were traced, while the remaining members were intercepted on their way to a planned robbery in another part of Abuja. Now, during interrogation, one suspect, Shamsuddin Hassan, confessed to shooting the security guard, while another claimed that he attempted but failed to prevent Somi from jumping from the 3-story building in order to avoid the robbery that was happening. Now, recovered weapons included an AK-47 rifle, a pump-action gun, pistols, ammunition, and the victim's mobile phones. Police say all suspects have confessed and investigations are still ongoing. Like I said, for me, this is exactly what we wanted to see. I hate that this happened with so much passion. I mean, I can't express how much I hate that this happened to Somi, but it is also just a little bit comforting to know that those people who did this and they had no remorse, they were just about to do this again, in Abuja to another building. It's just comforting to know that they have been caught and they will be facing the full extent of the law.
Absolutely, that's very comforting. We last week when we were discussing it, of course, we were all touched. We're still very much touched by that needless death by our own Somi. But we must commend the police for what they have done so far. The investigation that they've conducted, the tracking down of at least 12 of those who participated in that dastardly act, and then arresting 12 of them. I'm slightly worried about the confessions that we're getting from at least one of them. The fellow who's claiming that he tried to prevent Somi from jumping. In what way, at what point, where? In our room, in our flat, or downstairs? When we have somebody, a killer like that, saying something that he was trying to be a hero, maybe there's a lot more information that the police should extract from him so that we can truly get to the bottom of this matter. I do not believe that a killer will suddenly turn 360 degrees, trying to sound good that he had a good heart trying to save our own Somi. But we must commend the police. When they are ready to work, we know that they really can get to the heart of any matter as far as investigating crime is concerned. The only thing that will make everybody happy, the only thing that will bring succor to the families of Somi and to the Arise management and staff, in general, is to see everybody involved in this dastardly act arrested and served justice. That is what will happen, so that it can also serve as deterrent to others like the 12 that have been arrested, who even after having done what they did, were still planning to go and carry out another attack in Maitama in Abuja. This, of course, is also a message to the authorities in Abuja that the narrative is not encouraging. When professionals, when people living in gated estates, in highbrow street, anywhere in Abuja, the nation's capital, do not feel safe. It is incumbent on the Inspector General of Police, on the Minister, on even the President, to say that this should not continue. Declare a state of emergency, not only on Abuja as far as security is concerned, but everywhere in Nigeria. That is what the Constitution demands. Safeguard the lives and sanctity of every Nigerian. This way, I'm sure that you have a word or two on this good news coming from Abuja.
Yes, I mean, it is good news that they have been found. I think there's a lot, this tragedy this tragedy is just overwhelming. I think it's very hard to understand. If you hear the amounts or the pittance that they're taking people's lives for, it's very hard to comprehend. Another tragedy here is that do we need a national pressure campaign in order for the police to do their job, to be this efficient and this effective in finding criminals? Like, would they have been found if Somi was not an anchor here on Arise News? And another thing that is frightening about this tragedy is that these men, as Kachi said and as you've highlighted, were unremorseful and were on their way, according to the police, to go and rob and possibly kill other people in Maitama, in Katampe. We're talking about highbrow areas. And I think this is very important when we talk about streets that are being, built here in Abuja and they don't have street lights. When we talk about lack of security infrastructure, when we talk about our security apparatus not being proactive, reacting from one crime to another, instead of also doing investigative work to prevent this type of crime from happening. And so I think this is the beginning, as you've highlighted. This is not the end of the story. And yes, they need to investigate further because, as you said, it's very funny for a man, a criminal, to come and tell us he tried to prevent her from jumping after they had just killed the security guard downstairs. As you said, the story is not over yet.
Not at all. We're waiting, for the information from the police, and we do encourage them to go all the way. All right, a former chairman of Cadbury Nigeria PLC and one-time High Commissioner at Nigeria's High Commission in London, Dr. Christopher Kolade, died this past Thursday at the age of 93. A statement from the family announced the passing of Dr. Kolade, but gave no further details. Kolade, who began his career in broadcasting and rose to become the Director General of the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation, where he was known for upholding professionalism and integrity. Was born on December 28, 1932 in Erioke, Osun State. He later moved into the corporate sector, serving as chairman of Cadre Nigeria and holding various roles in the Nigerian Institute of Management and Nigerian Economic Summit Group. I mean, our condolences to the families, friends, associates, everybody who knew Dr. Christopher Kolade. He was an epitome of what was good about Nigeria, what was right about our own profession. Brilliant broadcaster, brilliant journalist. He was not found wanting at all in any aspect of life. Nigeria will miss him dearly. A great teacher, a great journalist, a good administrator, and a man who the entire nation respected as Mr. Integrity. He was not a politician, but when the time came for him to serve his country as the High Commissioner for Nigeria in the UK, he accepted wholeheartedly, and he did exemplarily well, serving Nigeria. He tutored people. Many people will remember him for good things, for great things. We're thankful that he lived to a ripe old age of 93. We hope, of course, that his legacy will continue and that people will continue to emulate what it stands for, particularly now that we do not have, as it were, enough role models in our profession and in our national life in general. Dr. Christopher Kolade, we will miss you, but rest well. Kachi.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, Steve. I think my heart just goes out to the family and his very, very dear friends as well. And we hope they find comfort at this very, very difficult time. Adesua?
Yes, this is also a celebration of life and of legacy, of a life well lived. So as we also offer condolences to the family, Yorubas we also celebrate life, especially when someone has lived for this long. So, it's a beautiful thing that you were able to celebrate his life and the legacy and the impact that he had on the nation and on our profession.